everybody. I'm Tracy Tucker, and welcome to the Who's in My Genes podcast, where we share adventures in exploring family trees, including tips for researching your own family tree, stories about discoveries, DNA testing and matches, and lots about adoptee searches and advocacy, because we believe everyone has a right to know who is in their genes. In this episode, we're going to talk about names. I've talked a lot about names, so I thought maybe I would dedicate an episode just to names. Some interesting names, about names, what names mean to us, in the hope that this may give you some tips and ideas for when you're conducting your own ancestor research. After all, aren't most people a mystery until we know their names? One of the first things we ask new acquaintances is what their name is. When a woman is pregnant, she often gets asked 3 questions. When are you due? Girl or a boy? What's the name? When law enforcement is looking for someone, whether it's a victim, a witness, a suspect, or a perpetrator, they want to know the name. Our names are very personal, and knowing our name can lead right to us. Remember that little piece of paper I found when I was a kid that had a bunch of information on it about my biological parents? It had height, weight, hair color, eye color, ethnicity, hobbies, schooling, even employment. Guess what it did not have? Names. I actually have 2 names. If you've listened to the origin story episode, you know I was adopted. So I go by the name my adopted parents gave me when they got me when I was 7 weeks old. But I was also given a name by my birth mother. When I learned of that name, I considered trying it on and seeing how it felt, thinking maybe I might want to change my name officially. That name was Samantha, which I love, but I decided I'm Tracy. Some people do change their names, though. I mean, most women change their surnames when they get married. I did. I've been watching the reboot of the TV show What Not to Wear, which is called Wear Whatever the F You Want. And one of the episodes features a woman who changed her name after she beat cancer. She now goes by Freedom. The show is super good, by the way, if you're into that kind of thing. I was talking about this with my son, and he reminded me that there was a basketball player in the 70s and 80s, yes, the 1900s, who changed his name from Lloyd Bernard Free to World Be Free. Another basketball player born Ronald William Artest Jr. legally changed his name to Meta World Peace, and then changed it again to Meta Sandiford Artest. There are countless examples in the public. Anyone ever heard of Prince Rogers Nelson? In the U.S., you usually need a court order, and the process varies by state, of course. I changed my surname to my husband's when I got married, so the name change was part of the marriage paperwork. When we divorced, I kept his name because it was also my son's last name, and I didn't want to make things too confusing for him. Eventually, I did change it back to my maiden name, which is the name my adopted parents gave me. And I had to hire an attorney and fill out a bunch of paperwork, pay some fees, and then actually attend a hearing with a judge, and the court approved it. It wasn't difficult, really, just tedious. In the UK, you don't even have to follow a legal process to start using a new name. You may need a deed poll, which you can make for yourself, or apply for one in order to put it on public records for the purpose of updating official documents. But it may just be easier to go by a nickname if you want to change your first name, but not your last. But think about the confusion of that in records. Friends, neighbors, coworkers will know you by a nickname. So if someone asks about you using your legal name, they may not know you're the same person. Hey, not really your problem, right? I'm just looking at this from the perspective of your descendants trying to find you in records and getting confused. Was she Tracy or Samantha? Is that the same person? Is it 2 people? Were they twins? My ancestors who immigrated to the U.S. from Macedonia had nicknames. Scene went by Sam. Temelko went by Tony. Paraskiva went by Pearl. My client, who had some Polish ancestors, had Bronislawa, who went by Bertha, and Kazimierz, who went by Charles. In some of these cases, what I'm referring to as their nickname may be the English translation of their foreign name. Sometimes not. My Macedonian grandmother's first name was Ristana, which translates to Christina, which is what she went by in the US. It is definitely something to be aware of. One interesting twist on this is when you're conducting air tracing, which I work in regularly. In air tracing, often the only thing you do have is a name and a date and place of death, a birth date if you're lucky. What is a name without a person attached? In one interesting case, we had the deceased person's name as, well, I'm slightly changing the name here in order to protect the alive, but you'll understand the point. So the person's name was Graham Grayson. After searching and searching and searching for this person, I was at a loss. I finally said, well, let me search it as Grayson Graham instead. And guess what? That was it. His first and last names had been reversed. Ugh. Many immigrants changed their names. No, names were not changed at Ellis Island, but immigrants did change their names themselves sometimes for various reasons. For example, to sound less ethnic so they could fit in better, to be easier to spell or pronounce, to leave it all behind. Who knows? When you're researching ancestors in other countries, familiarize yourself with the naming conventions there. It can actually help a lot and explain some things. Google is our friend when it comes to names we may not be familiar with. Remember the Poisson fish surname? One of my clients wanted information about her ancestors from Denmark, which I had not done a lot of research in. The first thing I did in that case was to find some maps of the area so you can analyze if the locations you find people in make sense. But this episode's about names, not maps. Anyways, until the mid-19th century in Denmark, most families used the patronymic naming custom, meaning deriving the name from the father's name. Matronymics would be from the mother's name. Matronymics, sorry. In Denmark, they didn't use fixed surnames like we do. Instead, children's surnames were their father's first name combined with either sen, S-E-N, for sons, or datter, D-A-T-T-E-R, for daughters. For example, Kristen Jensen's father's first name was Jens, and Kristen's son's surname was Christensen. Married women kept their own surnames after marriage. I'm sure you can name many surnames off the top of your head that end in son. Johnson, Anderson, Jameson, Henderson, Jensen, Wilson, Nelson, so many. Spain and Portugal used to use a similar system by adding EZ to the end of the father's name, meaning son of. For example, Rodriguez is the son of Rodrigo. This practice has declined in use, but there are still many Spanish surnames ending in EZ today. Rodriguez, Gonzalez, Martinez, Lopez, Perez, Fernandez, and on and on. In Iceland, they also add son and daughter. And in Russia, people have three names: their first name, a patronymic name, and a family surname. It helps to understand the local naming conventions when you're researching. A little research can go a long way in helping you understand the names, who's who in the family, who their parents may have been, etc., once you know how they may have been named. In some cases, when more than one person of the same name lived in the same area, further descriptive information would be added to distinguish between individuals. They often used geographical surnames using the name of the location, farm, or house where they lived, or occupational surnames based on the person's trade. There were a few examples of this among my clients' Danish ancestors. Christian Peterson Bager. So Christian is his first name. He is Peter's son, so Peterson is a surname. Bager, B-A-G-E-R, means baker. so likely this was an occupational descriptive, or it could mean that he was from the Big District. Good grief. Another was Hans Hansen Raven, with Raven, R-A-V-N, being some type of unique identifier used to distinguish him from another Hans Hansen in the area. A third was Peter Hansen Filster, with Filster being the descriptive. It was also not that unusual for two or more children in the same family to have the same first name, Ugh. Sometimes it was because the older child had died, but this is not always the case. So yes, recycled names. So it's super helpful to know this, right? As you can look at a surname and know the first name of that person's father. So Kirsten Hans' daughter is Hans' daughter. Anna Lars' daughter is Lars' daughter. Jacob Nielsen is Niels' son. It's also helpful when there are blended families. For example, Soren had 2 children with his first wife, then 2 more with his second wife. But living with them was also a child with a different surname, Anderson. So this is likely his second wife's child from her first marriage, or at least gives us a clue what to look for if we want more information. We would try to find details of the second wife and the child with a man named Anders. In Italian families, firstborn sons are often named after the paternal grandfather and firstborn daughters after the paternal grandmother. There was also a period in 18th and 19th century England where they used a very specific naming pattern. The first son was named for the father's father. The second son was named for the mother's father. The third son was named after the father himself. The fourth son after the father's eldest brother. The first daughter was named after the mother's mother. The second daughter after the father's mother. The third daughter was named after the mother herself, and the fourth daughter after the mother's eldest sister. What did they do when the mother was the eldest sister? Ugh. I understand the honor and thought behind this, but think about the resulting number of people in these families who have the same name. It can be really helpful for hints, but not necessarily when you're trying to distinguish one Alfred Taylor from another. One of my clients was trying to break through a brick wall on his great-grandfather from Germany who immigrated to New Jersey. He gave me access to his ancestry tree, and I got to work analyzing the facts and sources already there. I created a detailed timeline with everything we had and came to the conclusion that the details were actually from 3 different men of the same name who lived in the area, one of whose wife had the same name. Ultimately, that project was only successful in disproving information. Hopefully one day some new documents will be found that will help us out. I never give up. So some cultures honor their family members by naming their children after them. In the Ashkenazi Jewish community, it's considered bad luck to name a child after a living relative, so they are often named after deceased relatives only to honor their memory. I've also talked about creating a surname list so that I can start remembering all the names in the tree in case I run across a clue somewhere when researching someone else. I alphabetize them, and if there are some more interesting surnames that could be easily misspelled or just plain spelled differently, I brainstorm out the different ways they could be spelled just to get it plugged into my brain. You can do this same thing with first names or even with their full names, because even simple names could be spelled several ways. My first name is Traci, but how many ways can you spell Tracy? Tracy, Tracey. Smith sounds like an easy surname, right? How is it normally spelled? Smith, right? But it could be listed in records as Smith or Smeth or even Smyth. How about Myers? Meyers or Myers or Miers? When you're looking, confirm the details, but alter your spellings when you're searching. When I was researching my childhood neighbor, I found Claire as Claire, Elizabeth Claire, and Clara. and Claire was spelled both Clare and Claire. Spelled differently can still be the same person, but you need to use other data points to make sure it's the same person. A few notes about census records, especially when it comes to names. Remember, census records, earlier censuses were actually handwritten by census takers, meaning someone walked door to door, sat down with the family, and wrote down what they said. There can easily be misspellings, or they misheard something, or were confused. Maybe English was not the household's first language, or maybe they didn't even speak English at all. Then, when the census records were digitized, someone transcribed that handwriting. I can't tell you all the errors I've seen in transcriptions. I'm not faulting anyone. A lot of this handwriting is not always easy to read. A tip I have is to compare the letters you're unsure of to other words on the page. This can help you see the pattern of the census taker's handwriting. Is that an R or an N? Is that an A or an O? I was recently working on a case where the surname was Goudeket, Goudeket, which is a Dutch name. You can't imagine all the different ways I found that spelled and transcribed. I think only one census record had it right. In Christy's story, we found Christy's aunt, who had been hiding in the records because she was going by her middle name instead of her first name. By design or by choice, we're not sure. But if she'd had a more common surname, or if we didn't know her middle name, we may never have found her. So remember, when you're searching, try all the names and all the spellings. What is anything more closely related to our identity than our name, right? Gordon Allport, who is one of the founders of personality psychology, once said, "The most important anchorage to our self-identity throughout life remains our own name." Some studies even have found that our names can affect our personality, what career we choose, and how we feel about ourselves. Some of this is covered in a BBC article, How Your Name Affects Your Personality. I'll put a link in the show notes. I was creating a family tree for a case a few weeks ago, and one woman's maiden name was Angry. Her married name was Mean. No, literally M-E-A-N. She went from angry to mean. I kind of laughed, but I also wondered, was it self-fulfilling or just a wild coincidence? I also wondered what she was like. Was she angry? Was she mean? Or did she just laugh about it and act as sweet as could be? One case I worked had daughters all with flower names. I called them the Flower Girls. They actually each had several names. The full names of the daughters in the family were Isabel Rose Caroline, that's one daughter. Daughter 2, Ivy May. Daughter 3, Kathleen Violet Mary. Daughter 4, Lillian Maud. Daughter 5, Pansy Georgina Marguerite. Daughter 6 had 2, Violet Iris Betsy. And daughter 7, Primrose Doris Priscilla. I didn't research this tree far back enough to see if these were family names or what, but man, how did they keep all that straight? I guess at least they had a theme. In the mid-1800s, it was apparently trendy to be named after famous people, even U.S. presidents. My second great-grandfather had a brother, George Washington, and a brother, James Madison. So context is important when you're looking at names. Think about why they were named what they were. What were the naming customs of the time? Where were they? Or where were they from? And how important is the spelling? How else could it be spelled? Is it easy to spell or hard? Easy to pronounce or hard? Could they have changed their name because it was hard to say, it was obviously ethnic, or they just didn't like it and wanted it to be something else? Or maybe some other reasons which we may only be able to speculate about. Some people who you found a birth for but then vanish could have changed their names. Maybe, like me, they were adopted out and their name was changed completely. Maybe dad died, disappeared, or they divorced and mom remarried, so the kids go by the stepdad's surname. Especially when you're having a hard time trying to find someone, consider all the possibilities, then get back to work. Remember, you're not really looking for a name. You're looking for the person, your ancestor, and they were the same person, regardless of what their name was. I'm going to quote a little Shakespeare here, as spoken by Juliet Capulet in Romeo and Juliet. "'Tis but thy name that is my enemy. Thou art thyself, though not a Montague." What's Montague? It is not hand, nor foot, nor arm, nor face, nor any other part belonging to a man. Oh, be some other name. What's in a name? That which we call a rose, by any other name, would smell as sweet. So Romeo would, were he not Romeo called, retain that dear perfection which he owes without that title. Romeo, doff thy name, and for that name which is no part of thee, take all myself. Romeo was Romeo. He was he, regardless of what he was called. Names help us find them, for sure, but their identity, their blood, their DNA is who is in our genes. Thank you for listening to the Who Is in My Genes podcast with me, Tracy Tucker. If you enjoyed it, please give us a great review to help others find the show and follow us to get notified of new episodes. Visit us online at whoisinmygenes.com for all the ways we can help you find out who is in your genes, and follow us on Instagram for the images we mention in the show. Links are in the show notes. Join us next week for a new episode of Adventures in Exploring Family Trees.